What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to this channel, we talk about mental health through pop culture, and we introduce you to a couple cool flicks along the way. My name's Captain Nostalgia, and today we're going to be talking about Jesus Revolution. Now, this is typically not the type of movie we discuss here on this channel, but my curiosity got the better of me. And I definitely feel like this is probably going to bring people to this page that probably have never heard of us, and we're typically horror and superheroes here. And if that's you, welcome! Jesus Revolution is the biopic of Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee's essentially 60s revival that started in California and eventually took over the United States. Now, I'll be honest, as a Christian and as a cinephile, I often feel torn between both worlds because I'm a guy that really likes prestigious stuff, really likes cinema that makes you think. David Lynch is my favorite filmmaker of all time. If that tells you any kind of inklings of the kind of movies that I like. And on the other end of that, I feel like Christian movies, just as a whole, they're overly cheesy. They feel emotionally manipulative, and they're written, acted, and really terribly. Like, they might understand the structure of how a movie is supposed to work, but the actual quality of said structure is very questionable. I was really on the fence about covering this movie because of that, and then this movie being a biopic, which is one of my top 5 favorite film genres of all time, my curiosity kind of caved, and I'm happy to report that while there are some hallmarks of Christian movies in this, and yes, I will say that there are parts of this movie that the music hits just right and feels a little bit like it plays with your emotions just a little bit. Maybe that's just my experience with this movie, but I definitely feel like I definitely started crying in some parts of this movie, and they're not really just emotionally parts. It's just, again, the way that everything was orchestrated within that moment. And maybe that's a compliment to the writer and the director and the composer, just kind of getting that moment just right. I definitely think that other people that watch this movie might not necessarily have that same experience. And I think this is probably the best acted Christian movie that I've ever seen. I think when you attach names like Kelsey Grammer, there's a certain level of expectance for a movie to be acted well, and it definitely hits on those. This is probably the best acting I've seen from Grammer in a while, which is kind of really refreshing for him. I always like it when you kind of get to see an actor of his caliber who's been around for a while turning a performance like this. It reminds you that there's still some gas left in that tank, and I'm honestly really curious to see what he's going to do next. Jonathon Roumie in this movie is most famous for currently portraying Jesus in the series The Chosen. I have not seen The Chosen, so this is kind of my introduction to Roumie. This movie only works as well as it does is because of Grammer and Roumie. Not only do they both have electric chemistry between the two, but they're also, on the flip end of that, they have this like very well done friction that appears later on in the movie, and if you could bring that kind of duality to the performance, I think it works really well. Now, this is the problem that I run into with Jesus Revolution is when you're telling the grand story of something of this scope, you tend, if you're going to conduce it down to a 2-hour runtime, you run into this question of whose movie is this really? There comes a point in the movie where it's focusing on Grammer's character, then it flips to Roumie's character, and then for the first half of this movie, you're essentially, you're kind of going back and forth until the two stories blend together, and then about halfway through, you get introduced to a character named Laurie, who is played wonderfully by Courtney. Let the record show too that there's not a single bad performance in this movie, and is one of the performances are some of the strongest legs that it has to stand on. Now, I want to also preface this by saying that the movie doesn't just like willy-nilly like introduce a third character and be like, here it is. He has subplots throughout the first film, but his screen time is very minor compared to Roumie and Grammer. But this back half of the movie is where he sees the most development, but also on the side that as the film focuses on him more, it focuses on Grammer and Roumie less. And by almost the halfway through the last act of this movie, the movie becomes less about Roumie at all, and Roumie just kind of exits the screen, and Laurie becomes the primary character that we focus on. I get it, there was some friction that caused some rifts between Frisbee and Smith in real life, and the film is just conveying that. And honestly, the way that this movie kind of captures the characters and kind of how they collide with one another, this movie probably would have been better suited for a limited series, because it just kind of feels like in certain portions of this movie they do rush. And then there are other portions of this movie that just kind of feel like they take too long. I think both the way that they handle Courtney's arc throughout the course of this movie, the way that they handle Grammer's arc throughout the course of this, I think that those are really well done character arcs from start to finish. Really great character growth from them. And while I do think that Roumie does a fantastic job, he ultimately gets the shaft in terms of character development, and the way that his character is really handled in this just feels extremely one note. Alright, let's run this through our Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Jesus Revolution a 3 out of 5. I think this movie has strong performances across the board, but it really loses itself with its sloppy pacing and its poor character decisions.